Ah, Illumination. You're quite the curious beast these days. I don't think there's any big name online that's into animation that properly respects this company, and for good reason. People have gone into far greater detail to why than I care to in this video, because that's not what this video is about, but TLDR, the movies are purposely made as cheap as humanly possible and are essentially factory produced to make as much money as they can. Combine that with the now infamous rise of boomer and baby loving minions and you can see why many wouldn't be the biggest fan of this company. I don't think they made a quote unquote bad movie, but from Sing and its sequel to Life of Pets and its sequel to their Dr. Zeus flicks, out of the big well-known animation studios, their claim to fame is being the most cheap, basic, bland milquetoast one around, making the most basic of entertainment and flashing colours for kids and absolutely nothing more. Though I'd argue it didn't necessarily start out that way. 2010, an absolutely incredible year for animated movies. Pixar are releasing Up and Toy Story 3, DreamWorks, in my personal opinion, have the singular best year they've ever had to this day, and even Disney are back on track after a decade or two of mediocre movies and mediocre box office pulls. Oh, and did I mention Coraline, or Nine, or Fantastic Mr. Fox, or Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? Animated movies are hot stuff in the time, and for good reason, there's no doubt about that. Looks like my childhood was in the modern golden age and I had no idea. Seems as good a time as ever for a new studio to try and take that route. To be entirely honest, the backstory of Illumination Entertainment is not a very fascinating one. Started out by Chris Melandri, who is a leading figure in 20th Century Fox, strove out to make his own animation studio under the behest of Universal. And, well, he made it, and that was about it. Yeah. So let's move on to the part we're all here for, shall we? Despicable Me is a wonderful movie. Its name might have been soiled quite a bit by some mediocre sequels and spin-offs, but let's be entirely honest, there's probably a hefty spoonful of nostalgia backing my opinion up, and I still love the Megamind rip-off. I still love Illumination's first outing, and here I'll do my best to explain why. First of all, yeah, bet you never expected to see the word lore around a Despicable Me discussion, but here we are. I know I just made a joke comparing Despicable Me to DreamWorks' counterpart Megamind, but to go back on that for just a moment, outside of, a villainous redemption, the two really aren't similar. Megamind is your classic comic book world, focusing on the battle between heroes and villains, and if it became a franchise instead of the sadness that did happen, I imagine it would expand on these elements. Despicable Me, on the other hand, honestly, I kind of love what it does even more. In this world, there exists a variety of over-the-top supervillains that carry out various schemes and plots to steal monuments and important items, one-upping each other for absolutely no reason, and I kind of love that. The focus for a good half of the first movie is a brilliant Tom and Jerry, or for a much closer comparison, Spy versus Spy style of slapstick action between said villains, in this case between Gru and Vector. Spy movies are very few and far between when it comes to animation, but it's just so fun to see villainous bases and traps and gadgets. Without the restrictions of live action, their creatives are able to do whatever their imaginations can come up with. And I love the distinctive feels between the two villains' layers, with Gru's being very industrial and hobbled together, with a homemade feel in comparison to Vector's sleek, clean domain. An English major could probably go into great detail about how empty and lonely and plain it is in comparison to Gru's more homely environment, but I'll just go ahead and say that both their styles are equally cool. This is something the sequels mess up in my opinion, especially the second. El Macho is a worthy follow-up adversary to Vector, but the context, with Gru now working for the undoubted good guys, just makes the conflict significantly less interesting. I don't go into these movies for exquisite tension or masterful character building, and neither do you. But imagine just how much more interesting it would be if our main character was still a villain when he was offered a team up by Macho. He could reject him because he wants to take over the world himself, or because it would harm the girls, but in the movie it's entirely because, well, he's a good guy now and that's it. All you need to do is compare the very clunky, homemade looking weaponry of the first movie to the jam guns of the second to see what I mean by kidification. Like, of course I'm not asking for Despicable Bloody Me to be brutal or hardcore in its animation, but at the very least, it used to be interesting. I think the third movie realised this somewhat, tossing out the AVL as soon as it could, and putting Gru back on his own. Though the damage was done by this point, and our protagonist is indistinguishable from a straight-up hero. Still, Brat is once again a worthy follow-up to our two previous villains, and probably my favourite of the three. This is the kind of stuff I want to see in a Despicable Me movie, and sadly, 2 and 3 didn't strike a good balance in terms of plots, I don't think. Far too much time and energy being spent on the brother situation and the children's antics, which matter very, very little at the end. Now, if we're talking about what the first movie did and the rest of them didn't, there's no real way we can look over, yeah, them. The minions of Despicable Me have taken over the world in the last decade that we've not seen since the Looney Tunes. Okay, you've already heard all this. No, you've lived through this. I've lived through this. They've had a spin-off and a sequel to a spin-off that spiraled into meme culture for people under 30 at the time. I don't know how you bastards do it, but it's impressive. But they weren't always this obnoxious. In the first Despicable Me, they're treated exactly as what they are. Comic relief, keeping them as side characters and little more. Like, the amount of time they had to themselves probably didn't exceed double digits in minutes. And you know what? I'll say it now. They were funny. Because they were able to bounce off the irritable straight man Gru, and even the trio of girls, not just each other. I think the Despicable Me movies prove first and foremost that these guys can be funny for any age group. But the second and third one was where they got obnoxious. The entire plot of the second movie practically revolves around the yellow critters, and in the third one, they get a third of the movie to do absolutely jack all. Which is worse? Honestly, it's up to you to decide that one. The minions are an enigma, and honestly deserving of a video all to themselves, but I guess that depends on how well this one does. Is now a good time for me to ask you to like and subscribe? This seems like a good time for me to ask you to like and subscribe, please. Thank you. Besides, that does seem to be all we have time for today. I've still not actually seen Minions 2: The Rise of Gru yet, but I'm keeping a much more open mind for it than I thought I would, considering those genuinely good reviews. And let me tell you right now, I was not expecting this movie to have good reviews. Go figure. Well, that's all we have time for. Until next time.